going to do a short series of, talking about floats, explaining how they work, explaining the materials that make good floats, and explaining how to make some fairly important floats. There are many types of floats, and I'm not going to cover every sort, but the sort of floats that I use a lot, which include wagglers, stick floats, croquille avens, and a few other sort of odds and bits. I'm not going to go into pike floats for extreme range, and I will explain about a few floats that I think should be avoided or can be improved easily. Floats have two purposes. The main one, this is going to surprise people, is to catch anglers. That's what 90% of floats sold by tackle shops and people who make them, they're there to catch anglers. That we fall for them every time, and the people who make floats, often there will be a great big range of sizes. I'm going to try and find a float here. This is a very old Ivan Marks Balsa 7 AAA. That's the biggest one in the range, and they went right down to 3 No. 4, so a tiny little float, a fraction of this size. So it's like 3 No. 4, 4 No. 4, 5 No. 4, 3 BB, 4 BB, 5 BB, 3 AAA, 4 AAA, 5 AAA, 6 AAA, 7 AAA. And in that range, I used to use there was a 5 AAA one for roach fishing on the Froome, and it was just spot on. It was the tip, this has got quite a thick tip, but the tip on that one was thinner than it should be. It was just one of those perfect floats. Previous to that, I used to use the 3 AAA one and the 4 AAA one, and then in time I just used that 5 AAA one. And the two biggest, the 6 and the 7 AAA, I used them about twice, and the very small ones I've still got them. I've never used them. And the same with stick floats. I like John Dean stick floats that were made in the early 80s, and they went a range of 3, the standard ones with plastic stems, 3 No. 4 up to 8 No. 4. Almost all the time I was using 4 No. 4, 5 No. 4 and 6 No. 4, and very occasionally the biggest ones and very occasionally the small ones. So you can see that people are making lots and lots of floats, and if you had the full range you'd have hundreds of different floats. And then, like most people, when I fish, carry duplicates, and before you know it you've got hundreds and hundreds of floats. And John Goodwin, who wrote 2 books with Ivan Marks, when they did the second one about float fishing, John said, Ivan had all of his float ranges, commercially available float range there, which was something like 140 floats at the time. And he said, well, do you use these? He said, well, sometimes. But John said, when it came down to it, Ivan much preferred to use the floats he'd made himself, the ones that you just couldn't make commercially. Like I say, so a lot of floats are made to catch anglers. There are people who make what they call traditional floats, beautifully made. You can't fault the construction in the varnish and the whippings and all the rest of it, and they will catch fish. But if you then look at the floats that the top match anglers have used, and many of them will use commercially made floats nowadays, they'll use some by people like Drennan or Drake floats or Dave Harrell floats, all floats that will catch fish. And they may use, like me, old floats, John Dean sticks, John Allerton sticks, When it comes to wagglers, a lot of anglers, the top match anglers, like to make their own, and how they're made and what they're made of makes a difference. It's very easy to make a peacock waggler. You can't get an easier float, and some take the crudeness to extremes. Dave Thomas just didn't even bother painting the quill. He might paint the tip either red or black, and he'd seal the other end and put a little bit of cane in there so he could attach the float, but he didn't bother with layers of varnish and paint. As far as he was concerned, the float was waterproof and it may be fished better as a result. So let's forget about the floats that are bought for the purpose of owning them almost. Talk about the floats. What is the purpose of the float? And there's a whole load of things. A float, let's have a look. Floats like these, that's an Avon float there, and this is a balsa float. We call these trotting floats, along with a stick float. I can't seem to find. We've got a nice big stick float with an alloy stem. That's a Dave Harrell one, an old one. And floats like these are attached top and bottom, so you have a float cap just below the tip there, and one at the base. You might have another float rubber on the stem. Same with the Avon, just at the tip, at the bottom of the body, and at the base. Same with the balsa, just with that. And top and bottom means you can cast it out, the weight's down the line, and you can trot that, you can get that to go down with the flow, and it will signal a bite. It's got a bit of buoyancy in the tip because you don't want the float going under every time the hook just barely touches the bottom. Obviously, if a fish takes the bait, it will go straight under, or if it hooks the bottom or drags too much, it'll go under, but it's not prone to going under too easily. So there's some buoyancy in the tip, and that buoyancy depends on the volume of the tip, not the material it's made of. It's a big fallacy that people, they think, oh, if I make this tip out of a neutral density or something, it's going to be more sensitive. No, it's entirely if you want a more sensitive float, you need a thinner tip. With pole floats, which I'm not going to I may do one on pole floats. This is about one of the smallest pole floats I've got. It's got quite a long stem, but I've got tiny ones, and it says 3 × 8. That's number 8 still leads, not shot. So it's 3. It's less than 3 number 10 shot, 3 number 11, something like that. I don't know where that would take that down to. It's a very small float, and it's got a thin tip. I've got floats with much thinner. So that's one extreme. And another extreme might be, I don't know, this is a chunky little Avon float, and it's got quite a thick tip, got a bit of goose quill in there, and so it's nice and buoyant. So this is great on a shallow canal, or up in the water on a pole, whereas this, this isn't a very big Avon float. It's about 5 BB, but in sort of 4 foot of quite boily water, trotting for grayling, perfect. And that, having that body near the tip, so the tip's sticking out, that's got lots of buoyancy at the top. So a river float, where there's any current, will have buoyancy near the top. If I can find it. This is a very old Drennan antenna. It's got a very thin antenna, and then a body. And so the buoyancy is near the bottom of the float, and that can be shotted down, and that will be incredibly sensitive. That will show a number 10 shot would register easily on that. You'd know it would go up and down with the tiniest of bites. You could dot that down. And so by having that on a still water, you tend to get the ripple on there, and so it won't bob up and down. Whereas an even float, if you fished it with a lot of ripple, it's going to bob up and down. The float, it'll just sort of hold in the waves. And this one's like I say, it's a sensitive antenna. It doesn't take a lot of weight. It's marked as, I think it's, I don't know, it's 4 BB. It looks more like 6 BB. And you can take it from there right up to great big peacock antennas with a body at the bottom that take 4 or 5 swan shot, and they're very much bigger floats. This is a fairly standard waggler. It's simply a piece of peacock quill. There's no insert on it at all. Painted yellow. That's for fishing where there's sort of trees on the other side, so you're looking at a dark bank, so that will show up in the current, show up in the dark light better than red. And at the bottom it's just got a little bit of cane. You put a float adapter on there, and this is really a river float because it's not very sensitive, and it's not a particularly thick one. I've got thicker ones than this, so you could drag a little bit of line on the bottom as it's going through. Because it's not a particularly heavy float, you probably wouldn't fish it in massive range or massive depth, but a fairly standard river waggler. And a slightly shorter one that's probably for fishing shallower water, sort of float you'd use for far bank chub fishing where it's not too wide, sort of 20 yards wide, and fishing up in the water, fishing maybe 3 foot deep. And in every case that the design is following the function that it's designed for. So this float, which is just basically a body, got a little bit of peacock quill in the tip, is a version of a Trent Trotter attached, got an eye at the bottom, attached bottom end only, takes about 3 or 4 BB, maybe 1 shot down the line. And you can fish very, very shallow water with this. You can fish in a foot or even less of water for dace and grayling, maybe chub. Whereas I can try and fish a foot of water with this great big waggler, you're going to be scratching their backs. So you can see the difference in the size. It's just going to be inobtrusive and do the job much better. Doesn't need a lot of sensitivity. If you get a bite on a float like this, it's going to just go straight down. They tend to just take it. I've been making floats a very long time, and without going through this, I've got a whole box of floats here, and there's all sorts in there. And these are just spares. These aren't even my main floats. Way back in at the start of 1975, there was a day, 1st of January of all days, when the conditions were perfect for fishing in Wareham, and I went and fished on the Piddle with a Ivan Marks 3 BB stick float and just caught dace until I was sick of the sight of them with a few roach. And my mate Phil was fishing on the Froome that day, and some of the Christchurch anglers had got wind of the big bags of roach and dace coming out at that time, and he was fishing there, and he had a load of roach, and someone had I think they had a 50-pound bag of roach, and these were roach averaging 12 ounces to a pound, 1 or 2 bigger ones. at that time I had some Avon floats that were Billy Lane floats, sort of 3, 4, 5 BB. The Christchurch anglers were using Croakwell Avons. Well, you couldn't buy Croakwell Avons. These were their experienced match anglers, and they made them. They're probably cork on quill. But Phil described these floats to me, and I made a float at the time, and this is it. And it's got a 3mm cane stem, balsa body, and a cane tip. So it's a bit heavier than a proper Croakwell Avon. I don't know if I've got. So here's a Croakwell Avon, and that's got balsa bodies, and the tip's similar in size. This is obviously a bigger float than this one. That's about 7 BB rather than this one's 9 BB. And when I used this in the following weekends after that, I caught good roach fishing bread across the Froome, which is above Wareham Bridge, so it's a bit narrower up there. We were casting a long way. And then years later we started to get exposed to proper Croakwell Avons. A tackle shop in Bournemouth started selling these made in Birmingham. I bought a few, and eventually I made my own copies. This is a copied one made in about 87. That was bought in about 86, that one. And I've made many since. In more recent times, I've started to put pole float tips to make them more visible. So design's all about making progress, improving the design of a float. And the thing about those hollow pole float tips is that the light they almost glow, and they're easier to see than just a painted tip. And these aren't too bad to see. I don't think I've got any with a... No, none yet. So, in a nutshell, what you need is a float that's got enough buoyancy. All floats are made of something that floats, otherwise they sink. They're not a float. Some of the material used in a float may be heavier than water. So a float like this got an alloy stem. The alloy stem would sink, but the top is balsa, so it acts like a bit of a keel. Though it's only alloy welding rod, I think it is, something like that. It's not that heavy, but you get floats with piano wire stems. Acts like a keel, a bit more stable. John Allerton did all sorts of stick floats. Is one of the sorts, quite a fat one there, not one of the originals, which I have got. So materials like balsa are very good. Bird quills are very good, crow quills, goose quills. And my favourite for wagglers is peacock quill. I don't think it can be beaten. People have made wagglers out of balsa, Sakanda's reed. People do make them out of things like Norfolk reed. I think the stuff is dreadful. It's just not. You can make a float, it catch fish, but it won't work as well. It won't cast so well. To make it more sensitive, have a thinner tip, less tip. If you have a hollow tip like the pole float tips, and you cut a hole in the side and chop off the top so the water can flow through, the only residual buoyancy is in basically the skin of it. So instead of a 4mm thick tip, you've got 4mm minus 3.5mm. So a lot less, a nice visible tip that's very, very sensitive, and they really are sensitive. Sometimes you want that residual buoyancy, which is coming back to thick tips like this one. And that basically is it. The length of the float matters. A longer float can get the line, if you're going to sink the line, can get it deeper down, get it underneath the surface, drift and tow. A shorter float can be useful if the water is shallow, or you're fishing right up in the water. You don't really need a long float then. Obviously a longer float's going to have more buoyancy if it's made of peacock with a body. More buoyancy means more load carrying weight, means you can cast it further, have better control of it. All these factors are important. I'm going to call it a day for this first one at that point. In the next one I'll go through the materials carefully and then finally go through actually designing some floats. So until next time, it's goodbye for now.